Now that we know that the Iranians do not listen to President Biden's public warnings, is there any regret here about unfreezing billions of dollars for Iranian leaders during the president's administration?
What unfreezing are you talking about?
He unfroze billions of dollars.
For Iranian leaders?
Yeah.
Really? I don't think so.
Okay,
So
you
first
guys
of all,
say it's for humanitarian purposes, but doesn't that...
but you don't believe me.
Well, doesn't that free up money for them to spend on other stuff? Where do you get the money for an unprecedented number of munitions to fire at Israel?
So first of all, I'm betting if they're sitting in Tehran, they're taking it seriously when President Biden says he's going to defend Israel. We put skin in the game, a whole heck of a lot of it, and knocked almost everything out of the sky. So I'm betting they're taking it pretty seriously. And as for this unfreezing, none of that fund, none of those funds set up in an account, by the way, by the previous administration, goes directly to the supreme leader of the IRGC, can only be used for humanitarian purposes. And we're watching that account very, very closely to make sure
they're watching that
that's what
account,
happens.
you know, just like with the same level of dedication that they watched, Afghanistan and the airport there, and the Hamid Karzai airport, and the planes that were taken off with people falling off the sides. You know, with that level of dedication and attention to detail, they're watching this. Golly. Welcome back to the program. Dana Loesch here with you. I'm just going right to him. Stephen Yates. I've been waiting to talk to him all day. I'm like, let's just get through. We got to get to Stephen. You guys know Stephen Yates. He is an expert on everything foreign policy. His specific wheelhouse, he's an expert in everything. He's worked in 2 presidential administrations. He's an expert on China. He knows a lot about the Middle East. He's an expert on all of it. You can find him at YatesComms on X. Didn't call it Twitter, finally. And he's with the America First Policy Institute and chair of the China Policy Initiative. Stephen, thank God you're here with us today. Thank you for joining us. I got to get your reaction to that because, correct me if I'm wrong, they had waiver after waiver that they even bypassed a congressional review, if I got this correctly, that enabled them to unfreeze billions and billions that were frozen as part of sanctions against Iran.
No, we had this debate openly, repeatedly, right away about what this magical word fungible means. That when, if I stuff $5 in your left pocket, do you have an extra 5 to spend in your right pocket? Anyone with common sense knows if you unfreeze bank accounts that had been controlled because of sanctions or otherwise, it gives the target of those sanctions an opportunity to do a whole lot of other things. It's obvious. Everyone knows it. I thought, though, that Kirby accidentally perfectly summed up the Biden strategy, though. They are watchers. They're not leaders. They're not really scaring the bad guys. They're not encouraging or upholding our allies. They're watchers. They watch the TV. They watch what's happening in the world. And it's just kind of a reactive comms strategy. And that's all they are.
That's a good point.
The only follow-up they got to it is don't. And it turns out that contraction of 2 simple words is ignored by everyone. At this point, it's stunning to listen to Kirby do his routine and act like he's borderline offended by Ducey's question. But the question is obvious, and so is the answer, and his tap dance just doesn't quite cover the gap.
We're talking with our good friend Stephen Yates. I want to give you, and I want you to judge my perception of what happened over the weekend with Iran and tell me if I'm just being too myopic about it or whatever. Because I feel as though they use drones, which I have been calling the mobility scooters of the air, the slowest things I can think of. I know that they had some rockets and some missiles. They had a ballistic missile, but it was mainly drones that they fired at Israel. I know that this all stemmed from that airstrike, that Damascus strike, which the general that Israel took out was the guy who masterminded the October 7th attack. He was not in a consulate, not in an embassy. It was literally in the Revolutionary Guard or their guard headquarters there in Damascus, and that's a terror group. Our country defines them as a terror group. So fair game. They take this guy out. Iran gets mad, but it was interesting that it was just. It really seemed to me kind of like a weak response, like they had to do something to save face because they were getting criticism from some of the proxies that, it's always the proxies that are out taking the heat and taking the hits, and then Iran just does what Iran does. They didn't really have a lot of other Arabic support. I mean, you didn't see Jordan supporting them. You didn't see the Saudis supporting them. They were joining the U.S. and helping to push back against that on behalf of Israel. It seemed like it was a babying effort to help Iran save face. What is your take on it?
Well, I don't think we can ever kind of minimize, not saying that you were, that any attempt by the Islamic Republic to have a direct hit on the state of Israel. And I think that the White House dangerously has tried to minimize that in the sense that they have overstated how much they expect our treaty ally to exercise restraint. Now, let's just think about this for a minute. If a swarm of drones were coming across the southern border and maybe 100%, maybe only 98% of them got knocked out of the sky, and we said, oh, look at how effective our air defenses were and how much money they wasted. I don't think Americans would or should take that too lightly. And where exactly these drones come from? You think the Iranians are just sitting there making them with their own two little hands? My guess is that there's others that are watching. What in the modern era of warfare does a swarm of AI-operated drones do against the U.S. and its allies? So my guess is that this was a learning expedition. I don't think that Israel can afford to say, well, it doesn't matter. they just needed to save face. I sort of get tired of the save face thing because of the Chinese statement about it. Of course, I'm very anti-Chinese statement.
I would never have guessed that about you. Never have guessed that.
I think there's more to this than the tit for tat that occurred over the weekend. I think that this is a test by the Iranians. I think that the Chinese are watching very, very closely. The most important thing to me is, does the concept of an alliance matter at all to anyone anymore? Because I see the world as very dangerous if we don't have alliances. We can like them, we can dislike them, we might want to make them stronger, but a world without alliances for the United States is very dangerous and costly for us. And so if Israel is our treaty ally and they're under attack, any equivocation about are we providing material support and who's good and who's bad needs to be black and white for this time.
That's a great point. Talking with our good friend Stephen Yates at Yates Comes on X, because at the same time, you hear, I've seen a number of lawmakers say, oh, well, Israel needs to show restraint. No matter what, I don't think that we can tell Israel to show restraint. For decades, they've been taking this abuse from Iran in this area. Whatever they decide is what they decide. It seems unfair for anybody to tell them to show restraint when no one says this to all of their enemies that have been attacking them for decades.
Yeah, well, there isn't restraint in response to rape and murder.
True.
That's what happened on October 7th. And it was internationalized. And Iran was involved in that.
Yes.
It was using its proxies for that. So this is a continuation of the same struggle. It's just now more out in the open about who the main actors are. And they can't really complain about a very bad Soleimani 2.0 being out of their country, doing bad terrorist-like things, getting greased. That's the least of what should be happening. That's the least of what should be happening. And so I think in doing that, Israel was showing restraint. They didn't take them out in Iran. They didn't bring the fight to them. But my goodness, they've been they've been restrained all along. I hope we would not be restrained similarly if our homeland were under similar attack.
Very good point on that. You mentioned the allies too. Is it being overplayed, the extent to which, like the Saudis and maybe the Jordanians and others seem to, at least initial reports, were aligning with Israel against Iran? I know that there's, the weird hate relationship between the Saudis and Iran, but they all kind of say the same thing about Gaza and et cetera. I don't know if that's just for their domestic audiences and that's not really meant for an international audience, but what is your take on that? Was that significant to you, or do you think it's overplayed or overreported?
I think it's strategically significant, and the reason it's strategically significant, at least in no small part, is it's affirming what the logic of the Abraham Accords was. It kept maximum pressure on what everyone in the region basically agreed was the dominant destabilizing threat, the mullahs in Iran. And it led to an alternative path to peace and prosperity in cooperation and opening some diplomatic ties with Israel and the Arab world. The Biden administration came in, the first thing they did was to pull back the terrorism designation on Iran's proxy, the Houthis, that was never mentioned in the campaign, and then just unloaded crap city on the leader of Saudi Arabia, who isn't as clean as the driven snow. But if you're going to look at the bad people of the Middle East, you're going to unfreeze money, sorry to say, Kirby, for the terrorist destabilizing force in Iran, and you want to berate the leader and the ally of Saudi Arabia in this. And what's happening now is that Israel and the Arab world are realigning again against this dominant challenge, and the Biden administration has put the United States back in the watcher position.
That's a very good point on that as well. You mentioned, talking with Stephen Yates, China's watching this, obviously. What is the response that Israel could have, and other nations in the area, that, and the U.S., allies, that would make China nervous?
Well, if Israel and any other combination of willing forces were to significantly degrade the nuclear program, the energy programs, and any of the other fields that Russia and Moscow have openly collaborated with Iran on, it would be a pushback against this fancy pants alternative to the U.S. and free world order that they've been talking about with BRICS and otherwise. And it would show, if you go too far in trying to attack the free world is in fact going to stand up for itself. It's not sunsetting the way the Chinese have repeated, and a lot of really soft-minded American and European academics have repeated, that we are on decline, they're on the rise, and we have to make some accommodation. To which I say, no, we're great as long as we get our own house in order. And I think we're about the business of trying to do that now.
I hope so. I hope we are. It was wild to see all of that over the weekend. And then, of course, World War III was, I don't think we're going to get into World War III, but you never know anymore. I mean, with this administration in charge, I mean, they called a lid on it. Is there anything, last question, is there anything that they did right at all in all of this? Because I see so many moving parts and so many competing narratives. I don't know. I mean, is there anything that they did correctly that might make you think, okay, well, maybe there's like one person with a brain cell that's in the administration that might be at least preventing us from like going into the hellscape of World War III?
Unfortunately, my answer is no. There is nothing that was reassuring in any of this. And just because people are starting their work week and deserve to know the truth, if you thought that Iran bringing those drones across towards Israel was shocking and unnerving, just think what millions of undocumented people coming across our border are looking at and learning from. And we have got to get our house in order now, because worse can happen in the United States now under current policy.
And may still, heaven forbid. Stephen Yates, always a pleasure. That's a Monday topic, if ever there was a Monday topic. At Yates Comms, one day we're only going to talk about super happy stuff. I'm going to make a note of it. It's just going to be super happy stuff. Good to see you, my friend.
Happy to be a ray of sunshine once again.
Have a great week. Good to see you.